Okay, good morning, everybody. The recording is on. It's time to get going. We have 10 days or so until Yontif, which is plenty of time to prepare, or at least to finish your preparations. So in order to do so, I wanted to spend a little bit of time reviewing these unique halachos of Erev Pesach Shechalios B'Shabbos. And we're going to try and do this in very practical terms. There's a lot of literature about the halachos of Erev Pesach Shechalios B'Shabbos and a lot of interesting concepts, but I want to make sure that we focus on the practical so that you're ready for Yontif in the right way. And I want to do so, ironically, by framing it with a question in Hashkafa, which is valuable all the time, but I think is particularly powerful for us in this unusual year of Erev Pesach Shechalios B'Shabbos. So we'll start with a question in Hashkafa. We'll go through the halachos. I'm going to share some simanim in Shulchan Aruch with you. We'll review some of the zmanim for this year in 10463, unless you're in a different zip code. And maybe we'll conclude with some hashkafa as well, because hashkafa is really so fascinating. So the basic question is, isn't this impossible? How are you supposed to make Erev Pesach on Shabbos? Or how are you supposed to make Shabbos on Erev Pesach? The halachic contradictions between the way that Shabbos is supposed to be observed and the way that Erev Pesach is supposed to go seem so contradictory to one another that it's almost impossible to do them both. So can that be? Can it be the case that halacha demands of us to do the impossible? We have two obligations. One of them is Shabbos. The other is to be getting ready for Pesach. And you can't do both, so too bad. Or is that not the case? And by definition, it's impossible for the halacha to ask us to do two opposing things which conflict with one another. Though this is an important question in hashkafa and halacha in general, our attitude towards what the halacha demands of us and why, but it's particularly relevant when Shabbos and Erev Pesach come together for the following obvious reasons. The issues that we're going to talk about today are, in, I guess, chronological order, would be B'dikas Chametz, Tanis Bechorim, B'dikas Chametz, Bior Chametz, and then Shabbos, eating chametz lechem mishnah on Shabbos, how to have shalosh shadis, etc. So Erev Shabbos is 2 days before Pesach. Shabbos is Erev Yontif. So that would mean, theoretically speaking, the regular time for B'dikas chametz would be Friday night. That's impossible because Or la'arba asar bokenes hachametz l'or haner. We're not going to walk around with candles on Friday night doing B'dikas chametz. The zman for Biur Chametz should be Shabbos during the day, but can we be Mevayer Chametz? Certainly not in the traditional fashion by burning Chametz in a fire. And then in the morning, Isser to eat Chametz kicks in. So you're not allowed to eat Chametz because it's Erev Pesach, but you have to have Shabbos. And on top of it, on top of that, you're not allowed to eat matzah because the Yerushalmi teaches us that we don't eat matzah on Erev Pesach. That, even though people have minhagim to start earlier, but certainly true on Erev Pesach. So we find ourselves in a kosher LePesach pickle. That's really the situation that we're in, and we have to try and navigate it. So first we'll navigate it halachically, and then I want to share maybe some navigation hashkafically as well, because it's a unique opportunity to talk about what I think is a very important principle. So by way of structure, let's study these halachos as they appear in the Shulchan Aruch. I will share my screen with you, and we're looking at the Shulchan Aruch in Hilchos Pesach, Siman Taf Mem Dalid 444, and we'll look at a few of the halachos together. The first halacha is when Yud Dalid is Chalios B'Shabbos, Bodkin Leal Shlosha Asar. Instead of doing B'dikas Chametz on Friday night, which we obviously can't do, we move B'dikas Chametz to Thursday night. Umivarin Hakol Lifnei HaShabbos. and Bir Chametz needs to happen before Shabbos, except Umishayir in Mazon Shtei Seudos Litzorach Shabbos. We leave a little bit of food over, meaning Hamotzi, for Litzorach Shabbos. The Suda Shlish is Mana Achar HaMincha, because Suda Shlishit is supposed to be had after Mincha the afternoon. Va'az Eino Yachol Lasos Alo B'Matzah V'lo B'Chametz Ela B'Matzah Ashira V'tzarach Lasosa Kodem Shah Asiris. So the reason that we move our Suda early is because the only thing you can use in the afternoon is Matzah Ashira. And you have to finish your Chametz before the Shah Asiris. I wanted to make sure I had the right times in front of me. And I think you can see it on my screen. At least I hope you can. The last time to eat Chametz, the next Shabbos morning will be 10:32. According to the Magen Avraham, that's our time. And the last time for Bir Chametz will be 11:46. So let's just jump back into the source sheet for a second so we're all on the same page. So what the Shulchan Aruch is telling us is that the first thing you need to know is that B'dikas Chametz isn't done on Friday night. B'dikas Chametz is done on Thursday night. That's a full-fledged B'dikas Chametz, the same way you would do it any other year, including a bracha. And as the Mishnah Berurah explains, also includes the recitation of Kol Chamira. We always do Kol Chamira twice. We'll talk about the second one in a second. But the first Kol Chamira is done alongside the B'dika, even though it's premature because the Isser Chametz doesn't kick into effect until Erev Pesach during the day. But we do B'dika and we do a Kol Chamira along with it. So we do a full B'dikas Chametz with the bracha, with the Kol Chamira. We just do it on Thursday night. And then with the Matzah Ashira business, which we're going to circle back to in a minute, but just to go in chronological order here, the Rama writes in response to the Shulchan Aruch, if you're not going to have matzah ashira, and we'll talk about that later, so then you'll have to find something else to eat your shalosh shudis with. So we'll go back to shalosh shudis. Sif beis. Tov levayer be'erev Shabbos kodem chatzos, kedei shelo yavo litos b'shar shanim levayer achar chatzos, ubiyom haShabbos yivat lenu. So the second issue that the Shulchan Aruch raises is how we're going to do Bir Chametz. So moving B'dikas Chametz is not so complicated. The truth is, I'll make another point about Tanis Bechorim just for a second, because it doesn't appear here in the Shulchan Aruch for a few reasons. Normally, we have a principle, you can move B'dikas Chametz early. We don't move fast days early unless we have to, with the exception which we just had was Tanis Esther. So the poskim explained the reason you're allowed to make Tanis Esther early is because Tanis Esther is not being makdim paranisa. It's not bringing tragic things sooner like it would be with Shavasar B'Tammuz or Tisha B'Av, etc., because those are unresolved tragedies of Jewish history. Even though we forget it sometimes, we're still living during the Chorban. Tanis Esther is a celebration. Soloveitchik talks about this in very beautiful terms in his essays on Purim, but this is something we all know. Experiencing Tanis Esther is part of reliving the story of Purim by going through the trauma and the uncertainty and the fears and the vulnerability that Jewish people experienced during the Purim story, during the times of Mordechai and Esther. So that's not so challenging to move the Tanis to Thursday. It's not being makdim paranusa. The same thing can be said for Tanis Bechorim as well. Tanis Bechorim can also be moved from Friday to Thursday. We don't fast on Erev Shabbos, and moving it to celebrate the way that the Bechorim were saved during Makas Bechoros is certainly appropriate. So the Siyumim will be on Thursday morning. If anyone has the practice to actually fast or for whatever reason can't participate in any of the virtual Siyumim that are offered around the world, so then they would be fasting on Thursday until this Mana B'dikas Chametz. Mishnah Berurah writes a person shouldn't do B'dikas Chametz in a compromised state. So if they need to have a snack before they do B'dikas Chametz, they can have a snack. Maybe they can eat a little bit, but primarily they should fulfill the mitzvah of B'dikas Chametz and then break their fast, or you should participate in the Siyum so that you don't have to. So the Shulchan Aruch says, well, what about Bir Chametz? Tov levar be'erev Shabbos kodem chatzos. So the next problem is there's no mitzvah of Bir Chametz on Friday, is there? The mitzvah of Bir Chametz, our working assumption that our tradition is that we fulfill the mitzvah of Bir Chametz on Erev Yantiv itself, not just as my kids are saying when they eat all the cookies in the house right now that they're doing it because it's a mitzvah, a biur chametz. I'm proud that we've taught them that, but we certainly want to be Makai biur on Erev Yantiv proper. So the Shulchan Aruch says you should burn your chametz on Erev Pesach, on Erev Shabbos. Okay, I understand why you can't burn the chametz on Shabbos, so we burn the chametz on Friday. Well, if you're burning the chametz on Friday, at what time? Right? What time is biur chametz on Friday? Well, there is and there isn't. A buzzword in Shulchan Aruch would be tov. The Shulchan Aruch doesn't usually tell you what we call best practice is. Shulchan Aruch tells you what the halacha is. So what does he mean? Quoting from the Rishonim, really from the Mordechai here, tov levar be'erev Shabbos kodem chatzot. It's a good idea to do it on Friday morning before chatzos, and it's not the zman bior, it's chatzos. Kidei shelo yavo litos b'shar shanim levar acher chatzos. So in order to maintain the practice of doing biur chametz as close to Pesach as possible, we burn our chametz on Friday morning. There's no issur to eat chametz on Friday afternoon. So it's almost a little silly to burn our chametz with a hard stop of chatzos. But the tradition is to remember that we don't burn our chametz until nightfall, because that's very confusing. We don't want people to think that biur chametz can happen anytime before Pesach. They need to know it's a priority on Erev Pesach in the morning. So we continue that tradition even though chametz can be eaten Friday afternoon, even though chametz can be eaten Friday night and Shabbos morning, biur chametz still happens dafka on Friday morning. It doesn't have to be before the zman biur, but it's best if it is performed before chatzos. That's Sif Beis. Sif Gimel is about pots. And because the Shulchan Aruch didn't live in the age of Tupperware, these halachos are somewhat different here in Hilchos Pesach than they are in practice, but it's a good marker. For this Shabbos, you don't want to be cooking things that are going to really get stuck in the pot, because how are you going to get rid of them if you eat them for Friday night dinner? Veinos and pasnuma bikara, same kind of thing. The Rama writes, so if you have pots that are full of sticky chametz with them, so you're going to have a difficult time getting rid of that chametz before the chag begins. So for that reason, we recommend not having any of your chametz pots, anything that you're going to use to consume chametz over Shabbos should be disposable. It doesn't have to be disposable. There are ways to fix it. The Rama says you could wash the dishes carefully, but the best practice would probably be to eat the chametz on things that are disposable so that they could be gotten rid of and you don't have to worry about, crumbs still being in your possession. Okay, so you have a somewhat regular Friday night dinner, although you may not. We'll talk about that in a second. Then you have to figure out how you're going to get rid of the chametz. So are you using regular dishes? Probably not, because you're already cooking Pesach food and you're using Pesach utensils in order to cook it. So in all likelihood, you're 99% Pesach and you're only 1% chametz. So the Shulchan Aruch says whatever chametz you have, yinar hamapa sha'achluba v'kanecha ka'aros be'etzba'o v'nei min ha'ayin imshar klei ha'chametz. So you have to shake off the tablecloth in a way that gets the chametz away. And you have to clean off any utensils that you use, and you have to get them out of sight. Remember, you don't have to sell your kalim that have chametz absorbed within them. You don't sell your regular plates and forks and knives. You just out of sight, out of mind. So the Shulchan Aruch says the same thing needs to happen here. So theoretically speaking, you consume all the chametz. All that's left are the utensils. If you have utensils of any kind that you needed to use that were chametz-dik, so then you just need to clean them off and put them away. You can't unload tons of chametz to a guy on Shabbos because he's going to carry them through Rosh Hashanah. You're asking him to do a malacha. That's not acceptable. But a little bit of chametz here, a little bit of chametz there, you can give him. In practice, what many of the poskim tell us to do with whatever crumbs are left is to wash them down the sink or flush them down the toilet, just to get them out of our domain as well. We try to not have any chametz be'en left. So in practice, what this means for us is that we should basically be, what we should basically be doing is having no chametz left in our homes. Everything should be put away. That's the safest policy. And the only thing really should be the the challah rolls that we're going to use to make hamotzi on Shabbos, and we should eat those with an abundance of caution. I mentioned this to a few people privately, but while I didn't remember every halacha of Erev Pesach Shechal Lios B'Shabbos this year, I do have very vivid memories of my own experiences as a kid, the few times that it happened, eating challah rolls outside in the backyard. So those of us who have outdoor space where they could do it, it's even better, but it's certainly not required, as you see here in Shulchan Aruch. A person can eat that chametz in their home. They just have to be careful with how they do it. So if you're eating it on a tablecloth, you have to make sure to get rid of it. It's not ideal if you aren't going to be taking out the trash between Shabbos morning and Erev Pesach to have crumbs of chametz in your garbage, because that still belongs to you. It's your garbage can and it's in your house. So the best way to do it is really to get rid of whatever crumbs you have left by flushing them down the toilet, as I mentioned. But more important than that is to make sure that we don't have any chametz that we don't need. So this is not the Shabbos to bake 6 of your favorite challahs and then realize halfway through that you want to be on a low-carb diet and half a challah left that you haven't gotten rid of. You should be a minimal shear. You should make sure you have enough challah to go around for everyone in the family, but you should have a small amount of challah, a few rolls. So you could eat 1 or 2 of them Friday night, 1 or 2 of them Shabbos day. And then by the time you're done, they're really gone. And the only thing left to resolve would be to get rid of the crumbs. It's important to note that while burning your chametz on Friday before chatzos is just l'shem minhag, that the isser of eating chametz and the last chance to burn chametz on Shabbos are still very much alive and well. So I think the times here in Riverdale, I mentioned 10:32 and 11:46. So 10:32 is the last chance to eat, and 11:46 is the time by which the chametz needs to be burned. So we'll be davening in shul extra early. We'll be davening, I think, at 7 o'clock and 8 o'clock with the goal of having everybody home by 9:15 or 9:30. And then that gives them an hour. So during that time, you're able to wash with lechem mishnah and eat challah. You don't have to worry about matzah. You don't have to worry about matzah shira, all these things. You can have regular chametz, and you have to finish eating that chametz. That chametz needs to be taken care of by 10:32. And then you have until 11:46 to get rid of it the way you're going to get rid of it. Shake it out into the street, put it in a garbage can on the sidewalk, flush it down the toilet, whatever you're going to do to make sure that all the crumbs are gone. It goes without saying that if your plan is to eat a proper Shabbos lunch, hot food or whatever it may be on Pesach dishes, so then you have to be very careful that the chametz doesn't come in contact with any of that food. If you're going to pull off a chametz meal on paper and throw everything still away, so then you could throw it all away together. But if you're going to have the challah and then eat your Shabbos lunch on Pesach utensils, so you have to eat the challah separately. I see something's coming in on the chat. Paul corrects me and says the first minyan is going to be at 6:30. So we'll review the calendar and make sure that we're davening at the right times. Okay. Shulchan Aruch says in Sif Hey, Im nishar chametz achar she'achlo mivatlo v'kofa alav kli ad motzei yantif umivaro. So at this point in time, Shulchan Aruch is telling us if there's any chametz left, which there really shouldn't be, so then you have to treat it like muktzah. Kofa alav kli ad motzei yantif umivaro. You can't burn it on Shabbos. You can't burn it on Yantif. So you have to wait until after Yantif so that the chametz could be gotten rid of. But again, as I mentioned, hopefully we won't have any chametz that we need to get rid of. This is, of course, separate and apart from the chametz that's already locked away and included in our mechira. Our mechira's chametz recognizes that we are going to be benefiting from chametz that we own on Shabbos. So even though the mechira is being executed on Friday, it doesn't take effect until the same time on Shabbos as usual. There are poskim that disagree with that, but that's, I think, our practice. Sivav, the Shulchan Aruch writes, Afal pish lo yishar chametz b'bayis achar suda shachris, tzarich levatel hachametz kadeshu mevatel kederach shehu mevatel b'shar shanim. So this is the last essential halacha before we talk about the shalosh shudis controversy, which is as follows. If you do it all right, and you're eating on chametz dishes, and your house is chametz, on Pesach dishes, and your chametz is totally gone, the only thing you have left is a couple of challah rolls, and you wash, and you eat your challah rolls, and then you have lunch, and then you bench, and there's absolutely no chametz left, so then you were a success. So the Shulchan Aruch says you might think that you don't have to do recycle chamira, you don't have to be mavatel your chametz because there's no chametz left in the house anyway. So that's not the practice. In the same way that on every other year, by the time you get to kol chamira in the morning, there should be no chametz left in the house. We're mavatel our chametz anyway, meaning mavatel our chametz bepeh, that verbal declaration that any chametz I have is, yeh ka'afra da'ara. So the same thing is true on Shabbos. If a person has any chametz left in their domain that has not already been sold before the Shas Bior, so at some point between the last chance to eat chametz and the Shas Bior, we should be mavatel our chametz as well. So to come full circle, what essentially has happened is the following. We're fasting on Thursday, or having a siyum on Thursday morning. Thursday night, we're doing our bedika a little bit early with a bracha, with kol chamira. Friday, we're burning our chametz as a hat tip to the way that it's traditionally done on Erev Yantif. Do it before chatzos, just to be makayim that tradition of biur chametz. Shabbos, we're having chametz Friday night. We're having chametz Shabbos day, but we're doing it carefully because we might already be on Pesach dishes. So we might be having our challah away from the table, making sure the crumbs don't go anywhere, making sure it doesn't come in contact with any of our kosher Pesach pots. And then we finish by 10:32 in the morning, so that we don't have, so we're not eating chametz after the last chance to eat it. And then we have an hour or so in which we are able to do our final kol chamira. And by that point, we have no chametz left except maybe the chametz that we sold that's locked away in the pantry. We've been kayim the mitzvah of Shabbos lunch. And hopefully by that point, we can wipe our hands clean of the whole thing. All you have to do is say kol chamira. If you had any crumbs, you flush them down the toilet. And then you're ready to go Erev Pesach into the afternoon. So maybe before, we're going to talk about Shalosh Shidduchos in a second, but let's just pause because I've been sharing screen and haven't been able to see all of you. Are there any questions until this point? You'll just have to unmute yourself and jump in. Okay, so far so good. So Kenny, are you trying to ask a question?
Yes, I'm trying to. Right. If you will be leaving Riverdale before Thursday evening, I believe you have to do bedika the night before you leave. Do you do it with a bracha, with kol chamira, or without?
So the general rule is that when bedikas chametz is done before the night of the bior, before the night in which the bedika is traditionally done, the bedika is done the night before you go without a bracha. So that would be true for any night other than Thursday night. As for kol chamira, I think the kol chamira can be done, should be done at its regular times because it can be done from anywhere. It doesn't have to be done on location, on premises. So kol chamira should be done along with bedikas chametz, wherever you are on Thursday night, because wherever you are on Thursday night, a bedikas chametz should be done. And that has in mind for the any domain that belongs to you. And the same is true on Shabbos morning. When you say kol chamira again, you have in mind not only for where you are, but any and all of your properties as well.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? And then let's talk about the Shalosh Shidduchos controversy. Okay, great. So Shalosh Shidduchos controversy is one of the great ones. Many people point this out. I think they point this out every time Erev Pesach is Chalios b'Shabbos, which is, nobody eats Shalosh Shidduchos anyway. Nobody likes Shalosh Shidduchos anyway. And then all of a sudden, Erev Pesach is Chalios b'Shabbos, and it's a crisis. How are we going to eat Shalosh Shidduchos? So that may or may not be true. And some poskim are mindful that when Erev Pesach is Chalios b'Shabbos, to use it as an opportunity to give chizuk, that we should do better with Shalosh Shidduchos and we should engage it properly. Either way, that's not my agenda for today. Everyone should do their best with Shalosh Shidduchos as they can. But here's where we are. On the one hand, after 10:32 in the morning, you're not allowed to have chametz anymore. And it's Erev Pesach, so you're not allowed to eat matzah. So the Shulchan Aruch, as we saw, says, well, you could have matzah ashira. And the Rama says, no, you can't. So we find ourselves in kind of a funny situation. What's the story? So we know we can't have challah. So number one, I guess there's at least 5 different approaches to this question. Which of them you like the most? So one option is you could have 3 meals on Shabbos that conclude before 10:32 in the morning. So is it a bracha sheina tzricha? If you go to the 6:30 minyan and you finish, we don't say Pesach de Zimra these days in shul. You could be done with no frills as early as, 7:40. So let's say maybe 7:40. So you could have breakfast at 8 o'clock if you live close enough to the shul, and then you could bench. And then maybe by 10 o'clock, you're actually hungry again. I know people who, they eat their breakfast after their hashkama davening, and then they eat again. So that would seem pretty normal. And to a certain extent, it would make sense to have benched and taken a break and then washed again. And then you could have had a Sudash Lishit. Did you fulfill the mitzvah of Sudash Lishit if you haven't davened mincha yet? The Sudash Lishit need to be in the afternoon. So it depends who you ask. If you believe that Shal Shidduch needs to be after mincha, some poskim would say you could wash and bench twice on Friday night, and then you have 2 meals Friday night. You only need one during the day. But we don't assume that way. We assume that Shal Shidduch is supposed to be in the afternoon. So that wouldn't even help you. If you assume Shal Shidduch is supposed to be in the afternoon, so then the only option would be if you believe matzah shira is acceptable. We have practiced not to eat matzah shira on Pesach. The Gemara discusses I guess what I like to call the chemical reaction that causes chimutz to happen when things turn, when the mixing of flour and water so that the chametz can have the potential to rise. What happens when other ingredients are put into it? So the Gemara, it's like a monkey wrench into the way the Chazal envisioned the way that chimutz happens. Does it happen slower? Does it happen faster? Should you get more than 18 minutes? Should you get less than 18 minutes? That's complicated. Bottom line is we don't eat matzah shira on Pesach, right? Number one, it's a chametz issue, potentially. We don't assume that way. We assume it's not chametz, but that's part of the complexity. Number two is that we eat lechem oni. Lechem oni is supposed to be a simple poor man's bread, which is bread, flour and water. So you're left with matzah shira, which is nishtaheh nishtaher. So it's not really, chametz in that sense. It's not bread. It's not matzah. On the other hand, it tastes like matzah. So many poskim think, as you see in the Shulchan Aruch, there's nothing wrong with eating matzah shira because it's not chametz. It's not chametz. It was baked properly. It's matzah shira that's kosher le Pesach, so that should be totally fine. There's no isser to eat it on Erev Pesach because you can't use it at the Seder. It's not lechem oni. Other poskim disagree with that. They say, what do you mean? The whole point of not eating matzah on Erev Pesach is you're supposed to be excited about eating matzah Pesach night. Who's excited about eating matzah Pesach night after having eaten matzah shira all day? So yeah, it has eggs in it or juice in it or whatever it may have, but I like to say it looks like matzah, it tastes like matzah, it's matzah. You can make that argument. So some poskim, Rav Schechter on behalf of the RCA and Yeshiva University and REITs, poskim this year that we should follow the tradition to eat matzah shira for Shal Shudis. You could do it in the afternoon. It's not a problem of eating matzah on Erev Pesach. It's not a problem of having chametz in your house. You could do it after you daven mincha, so you could have a full-fledged shal shudis, and you would wash and bench on matzah shira. So if you're in favor of that, that's an option. If you think you shouldn't be that, if it's a violation of eating matzah on Erev Pesach, so that's a problem. If you think it's chametz, it's a problem too. So some of the options include benching, taking a little bit of a break, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, go for a walk, learn some Torah, and then wash again so you can get 2 meals in the morning. It's definitely 2 chametz meals with bread. It's better than matzah shira, but it's not a great shal shudis because it's 10:30 in the morning. The alternative might be to have shal shudis and washed and bench with matzah shira, but the Rama says you're not supposed to have matzah shira on Erev Pesach. It looks like matzah, tastes like matzah. So that's not a great solution either. Some of the poskim say, okay, so you can't have matzah shira, you can't have bread in the afternoon, you can't have shal shudis early in the morning, so have shal shudis without washing. Who says you have to have lechem mishnah? Who says you have to have a hamotzi? You could have matzah balls and fruit or whatever it may be, something like that, a piece of gefilte fish, and you could be mekayim your mitzvah of shal shudis that way. So there's certainly a case to be made for that as well. So it doesn't involve dabbling in the debate of matzah shira. It doesn't involve eating chametz because the zman of achilas chametz is over. The only question is, are you really mekayim the mitzvah of shal shudis that way because you didn't wash and you're not going to bench? So what is the basic result here? None of the solutions are ideal. You're either eating shal shudis before eating shal shudis, maybe it's a bracha batala. You're eating in the afternoon, but maybe you shouldn't be having matzah shira. Or you're eating in the afternoon, but you haven't washed and you haven't benched, so you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah of shal shudis that way either. So we find ourselves like Bir Chametz, but even worse in this situation where Shalosh Shudas is almost impossible to have. So what do? So one option is to do whatever your mother and father did. Whatever the family minhag is, the family minhag is. I will tell you that I remember eating challah on the porch with my dad, but I don't remember if we washed and benched and ate again. I have to ask him because I don't remember. And I haven't asked him yet, but I have 10 days to figure it out. Some people do it, some people don't. Rav Shechter for us practically was posting that people should use matzah ashira. So matzah ashira is a good option. But what I wanted to share with you, however you decide to go, because all those options are perfectly legitimate for us, is the Aruch HaShulchan's reaction to this impossibility and what exactly it means. So let me put this Aruch HaShulchan up on the screen here for just a second. You see in the Aruch HaShulchan here in Taf Mem Daled in Sif Daled, the Shulchan Aruch writes, the Aruch HaShulchan writes something really funny in the first paragraph. Zoom in a little. He says, "Lefikach Erev Pesach shechal b'Shabbos botnes hachametz biyom hey le'es Erev bebracha v'omer kol chamira." So that's we mentioned. U'mishayir la'achilas laila la'achilas Erev Shabbos v'gam l'shtei seudos shel Shabbos. You should also leave behind some chametz so that you can have 2 seudos of Shabbos, right? Friday night and Shabbos day. Dissudah shlishi leka. There is no shalosh shudas. Because Shalosh needs to be in the afternoon, and then you can't have chametz and you can't have matzah because they're Pesach. But then he says, "Rak matzah shira hanalash b'mei peres yochel echol be'erev Pesach v'yote ba'yidei sudash lishi." So he says, there isn't shalosh shudas, but there is shalosh shudas, which I found to be a very curious formulation. So there is shalosh shudas with matzah shira. Why is he being so hesitant about it? But the reason that I think he does that is because of what he writes in Siv Vav. In Siv Vav, the Aruch HaShulchan quotes this famous position that I did not mention yet, which is the last option for how to fulfill the mitzvah of Shalosh Shudas, that's quoted from the Zohar. The Zohar writes in the name of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, Rav Shimon Bar Yochai haya osek b'Torah b'makom sudash lishi. That Rav Shimon Bar Yochai learned Torah and he fulfilled his mitzvah of Shalosh Shudas that way. I don't know who this quote comes from, but I believe the response of Shimon Bar Yochai is you can slug up a piece of Torah, but you can't slug up a good piece of herring. I think that's the line. So Rav Shimon Bar Yochai says he was Yotzei the mitzvah of Shalosh Shudas with Torah. So the poskim quote this, and they take it very seriously. Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, and he was able to channel the spirituality of Torah in a way that was borderline physical. You could understand it that way if you want to. But that's not what the Aruch HaShulchan does with this. V'yesh lahavim. Atu Rav Shimon Bar Yochai lo hayachal l'chaim sudash lishis be'ezim advarim shenivharu. So Rav Shimon Bar Yochai was such a big Talmid Chacham, so he didn't know about matzah shira, and he didn't know about eating bread and washing and going for a walk and then washing again before 10:32 in the morning. Why doesn't that work? V'nirli anias daiti baror. He says, I'm sure of the following. Tekol zehu milsa yisei rasa. He says, this is all icing on the cake, meaning this is all superfluous. Shaharei b'Shabbos zu ba'kracha lo nitzavina klal al gimel sudos. Shabbos zu, meaning Erev Pesach, there is no mitzvah of Shalosh Shudas. Kevan she'i efshar, because it's impossible to have one. And the best example he gives is midi dehave liyom haKippurim shechal lios b'Shabbos. Or when Yom Kippur falls out on Shabbos, what do you do for Shalosh Shudas? Well, you don't do lechem, and you don't do matzah ashira, and Rav Shimon Bar Yochai didn't learn Torah on Yom Kippur afternoon for Shalosh Shudas either. It doesn't exist. Even if the restriction to eat matzah on Erev Pesach is only rabbinic, so it's competing with the mitzvah of Shalosh Shudas. The rabbis have the authority to uproot a mitzvah b'sheva al taseh, meaning passively, you just won't be able to eat Shalosh Shudas because the Chachamim said you can't eat matzah. Shofar v'lulav b'Shabbos. It's no different than you can't blow shofar on Shabbos, you can't shake lulav on Shabbos. The kol shekain shenidcha mitzvah zu de sudash lishit, right? Shalosh Shudas is certainly not explicit in the Torah, even if it's midivrei sofrim or something like that. The Chachamim have the power to tell us you can't eat Shalosh Shudas because you're not allowed to eat matzah on Erev Pesach. Maybe that's only rabbinic. They still have the right to do it. The kevan shekain, but lala b'Shabbos zu mitzvah d'suda shlishi. The mitzvah of shal shudis is gone. The kevan d'suda gemura efshar. And since it's impossible to have a meal, don't tell me that now all of a sudden you're not allowed to have a meal, but you're allowed to eat twice as much gefilte fish. That's not, there's no chiyuv to do that. You're supposed to be hungry going into Seder. It's okay to skip Shal Shudis this year. Just like Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, it doesn't mean he felt in some Kabbalistic way that he could be Mekayim the mitzvah of Shal Shudis by being the Orer, the physical dimensions of gefilte fish, of Talmud Torah, to turn into a meal of some kind. That's not what it means. It meant that it's Erev Pesach and there's no Shal Shudis. So instead of Shal Shudis, Rav Shimon Bar Yochai sat and he learned Torah and he was more excited and he was hungrier and he was more excited for the matzah that he ate on the Leil Seder. So this is incredibly important, in my opinion, for two reasons. Number one, I think it lends a little bit of credence to the way that those who are not super makbid on making sure that they wash and bench a second time before 10:32, there isn't going to be Shal Shudis. There isn't going to be Shal Shudis. That's at least the position of the Aruch HaShulchan, but hashkafically, it's very important as well. Now, at another point in time, I hope we will put this together with other theories of the Aruch HaShulchan, because I believe that this is Rav Epstein L'Shitaso. A classic example of this, in my mind, which I've written about in the past, is his writings about people who are deaf fulfilling the mitzvah of shofar. It's another example of what we might call, potentially, a halachic impossibility. You can't tell me I'm chayiv to hear the shofar if I can't hear the shofar. What am I supposed to do? It's a very similar question. So I'm not allowed to have matzah. I'm not allowed to have bread. How am I going to have shal shudis? So the Aruch HaShulchan says, you're not. Why is everybody assuming that shal shudis has to happen? The reality is the Aruch HaShulchan believes, I think this is his hashkafa. I could be overstating it, and if I am, I apologize. It's not the case that halacha can ever put you in an impossible situation. Halacha doesn't contradict itself in the sense that it's not going to obligate you or hold you accountable for not having shal shudis when shal shudis could not be had. So as opposed to saying maybe we'll have a different kind of shal shudis today than any other shal shudis of the year, there is no shal shudis. So when we think about the incredibly burdensome task of preparing for Pesach as best we can, I think that this is a good rule for us to remember every single year, not just when Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbos. If you think it's impossible, if it actually is impossible, so then it may not be a mitzvah you should be pursuing so hard. Mitzvos are doable. I think by definition, mitzvos are doable. And the mitzvos that we observe in complement with one another should always feel like this is something possible. This is something that I can do. And to the extent that the mitzvos feel like they are contradicting one another, that the mitzvos are impossible, either we're doing them wrong or perhaps we're missing the message. So I'm going to hold here.